Hello, good afternoon. Today, our guest is Dr. Jibril bin Yusuf, and we're going to be talking about Islam in the Asante Empire. Hello, Dr. Yusuf. How are you doing?
I'm fine. By God's grace, everything is all right.
All right, I'm good too. So, I read your article some time ago, and now
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have a discussion.
Mm.
Professor Yusuf, what, what was the Asante Empire, and where was it located?
Well, the Asante Empire is actually located in what is today the Asante region of Ghana, which is actually located virtually in the middle belt of Ghana. It started life as a sort of kingdom made up of about 7 states that came together to form what we call Asante Amantuan Song. That is the 7 principal Asante states, with Kumasi as its capital. History is replete with narratives regarding the various kings of Asante. The one who placed the Asante kingdom on the road to territorial pride was the authoritative king Osei Tutu, who earlier we are told actually was sent to the palace of the Denchirahine to go and serve him um, as an heir to the throne. Unfortunately, so many events actually happened which made Osei Tutu flee from the palace of the Njahini, leading eventually to the founding of what we call today the Asante Kingdom. Um, Asante was actually placed on the road or on the way to territorial pride when Osei Tutu actually gave battle to the king of Denja, whose name is given as Intim Jakari, during the decisive Battle of Fayase, fought somewhere in 1701. It was after this battle that Asante was actually placed on the way to territorial pride.
All right.
Hmm.
And it was one of the greatest empires in West Africa.
Likely. In fact, there have been empires and empires, but the empire built by the Asantes appeared to have been one of the greatest, if not the greatest, because of the power of the military that the Asante kings actually had. This military is actually noted to be what we call the Adamfo system of the Adamfo system. Why? Because it had various branches which actually helped the Asante in the course of the various wars that the people fought. We had the apart from the Omahine, we had the Adontenhine, we had the Nymphahine, we had the Bengumhine, then we had the Nchidom. All the by the Adontini, we have the rear van, we had the left wing, we had the right wing, then we had the rear wing. All these had specific military men or a group of soldiers who actually were in charge of the various aspects of the Asante administration. When it comes to war, they performed very well, which actually made Asante win or emerge so victorious in many of the wars that it fought, making Asante uh, virtually unparalleled or unchallenged in this part of Ghana. To be frank, when Asante actually ceded its power to the British, then the whole country actually came under the British rule. So, in short, if we are talking about the most powerful empire in Ghana, we are talking about Asante.
So we're going to be talking about Islam in the Asante Empire. How
Yeah.
was Islam introduced to Asante?
Well, I would say that the introduction of Islam to Asante occurred perhaps in 3 stages. The first stage, actually, I would like to refer to it as gradual infiltration. By gradual infiltration, I mean Muslim, whether they are scholars or the Muslims themselves, finding their way gradually into, I mean, informally, into Asante in such a way that they escaped any official attention or any official scholarly attention. This is the time various individuals, whether in the form of searching for various trade items, including gold and cola, these traders actually thought that these products actually abounded in Asante. So they found their way to Asante, sneaking through whatever route that they could access to Asante so that they could get the opportunity to buy those products that they need, specific among which were gold and the cola. That is the first part of what I refer to as gradual infiltration. Then we have the point where Asantes actually began to, in the course of the expansion, territorial expansion, I mean, they began to spread their wings to the northern part of Ghana, where Islam had been very much entrenched. By expansion to the northern part of Ghana, we mean the Asante conquest of various places, including Gonja State. Gonja State was a place where Islam had been very much well entrenched. We also have Dagomba. Dagomba was also a state where Islam was well, I mean, various places in the northern part of Ghana, including Wa and many other places where Islam had been well entrenched. Asante made an effort and indeed, in some cases, succeeded in conquering those territories. So then, of course, not just the conquest of those territories, but after this conquest, Asante came home after this wars with a number of slaves who were Muslims who were taken captive and brought to Kumasi or other places in Asante for, as captives. And so the Muslims are like Polynesian. Anywhere they go with their religion. So in Asante, they came home with their religion, and they practiced this kind of religion everywhere they had been. Asante also came to admire the literary expertise of the Muslims so much so that they also, and that is the third part that I will talk about, began to invite some Muslim scholars from the north, whether in some cases in the form of capturing them personally or probably taking them captive in the course of their wars. These Muslims were brought in their numbers, these Muslim scholars were brought in their numbers to Asante for the purpose of helping with their literary expertise to not just record the history of Asante, but even contribute to the Asante military, helping the Asante Hene in winning their wars with prayers and many other benefits that they wanted to derive from the Muslims. The fourth part, I will talk about the migration of some other ethnic groups, including the Hausa and many others, subsequent to the Asante encounter, particularly with the British. When the British began to, wage wars against the Asantes, both parties, whether Asante or British, began to, bring in some soldiers from outside. Some of these soldiers were of Jula origin. Some were of, various ethnicities. And when they came to assist Asante within the region to be able to win their war. So this I will call the fourth stage of the introduction of Islam to Asante. But then the issue is that it is not the whole of Asante that Islam had the opportunity of getting planted. The northern territories of Asante, like Mampong and other places, had the opportunity of coming into contact with Islam far earlier than other places would get the opportunity. Now, as far back as the time of Osei, we are talking about the early part, the first 2 decades of the 18th century. During the time of Osei, Muslims were available in Kumasi. So, but of course, many scholars think that Islam would have been introduced to Asante somewhere around the 17th century thereabout. Whereas others think that the political reforms of one of the kings of Asante, Nana Osei Kwadwo, which is popularly known as the Kwadwoan Reform, had the effect of, for the first time, giving an official endorsement for the recruitment of Muslims that were very knowledgeable in Islamic literature and Arabic in particular for use in the Asante royal family. This is the period when Islam began to make very significant impact on Asante with the recruitment of the Muslim scholars for use within the Asante royal family. Till today, we have the impact of these Muslim scholars even within the Asante Palace.
Was Islam in the Asante Empire an elite religion or a popular religion?
Well, um, it depends on how you see it. I would not personally refer to it as a popular religion per se, because if you have read my paper titled Why Islam did not make significant impact in the 18th and 19th century, you will see that in spite of the benefit the Santa kings actually derived from the Muslims, whether the ordinary Muslims or the Muslim scholars, Islam still remained a minority religion. But then, to call it an elite religion, perhaps we may want to call it an elite religion because somewhere by the close of the 18th century, one would not be wrong to say that, or maybe even in the beginning of the 18th century, 19th century, sorry, one would not be wrong saying that the Santehene had seen the value of having his personal cleric. I mean, the Muslim scholar referred to in Santi or in Kumasi as the Ohene Kremo or the Santin Kremo Imam was somebody who was noted to have been the personal imam, the personal advisor to the Santehene. And the various Asantehenes who have actually had opportunity of leading Asante have all mutually regarded these personalities as their personal imams. On every Friday, for example, the current Asante Kremo Imam, who ordinarily people would have thought should be the Imam or the leader of the Muslims in Asante, he is expected at Manshia on Fridays. Every Friday, he is expected to go to Manshia to perform rituals. I mean, to perform sacrifices for praying for longevity of life for the Santehene. So, I mean, in history, we realize that the Santehene had these individuals so that in times of spiritual, uh, maybe I may call it attacks, in terms of spiritual needs, the Santehenes will personally fall on these Muslim clerics, or better still, when they needed assistance from them, whether in the form of strategies for winning a war or prayers towards securing victory in a war. These Muslim clerics became uh, so many in the palace of the Santini, so much so that especially after the popular reform of the Santini or Sekwajo, that the subsequent Santini or Sekwame, Nana or Sekwame, had no choice than to embrace these Muslims, so much so that at a point in time we are told, according to sources, he nearly converted to Islam, while others even think that he converted to Islam, and went beyond that to even introduce Islamic law or the Islamic code, legal code, as a law for Asante, which eventually resulted in him being destitute. So we read in the Islamic history of Asante that Osei Kwame happened to be the first Asante Hene to have been destitute. And the reason why he was destitute, many scholars who have researched into the Islamic history in Asante believe that Osei Kwame was actually destitute either because of his constant inclination towards the Muslims, or others have been so straightforward to say that because he converted to Islam. For many reasons, a Muslim or an Asantehene cannot convert to Islam and still remain not only Asantehene, I mean, among the Akan, their social structure is such that it is not easy for one to become a chief and also become a Muslim, or for one to become a Muslim and at the same time remain, for one to become a chief and at the same time remain a Muslim. For obvious reasons, I mean, among the Fantis, one, in terms of inheritance, Fantis or what do you call the Akan, sorry, among the Akan, among whom the Santis are part, one is supposed to be inheriting through the female line. One inherits through the mother's line. So when, for example, somebody dies, the one who is supposed to inherit him,
Gibra, repeat what you
yes,
just said. One should be inheriting.
yeah,
Continue from there.
one should inherit through the female line. Among the Akan is basically matrilineal in inheritance. So when one loses a family member, or when one dies, one is supposed to be inherited by either the son of a sister. You understand that? Or somebody who is coming from the mother's side, not the father's line. The implication is that a person's paternal ancestry doesn't really have any serious implication for him as far as the Santis were concerned or the Akans were concerned. Thus, implementing an Islamic legal code in a Santi, which Nana Kwame had actually inclined to do, meant that in effect, the Santis were not going to be able to, for example, have the opportunity of selecting an Asantini from the mother's side, because in Muslims are basically expected to be patrilineal. They inherit through the paternal side. It doesn't mean that a Muslim cannot inherit from his mother's side, but the assumption is that women are taken care of men. Women are taken care of by men, and so all things being equal, children are expected to get higher inheritance, higher, levels of inheritance from their fathers more than their mothers. So unfortunately, the chieftaincy itself is also structured along matrilineal lines. The implication is that when one dies, if a chief should die, the one who is going to inherit him should actually come from the womb of a sister, for example. In the case of Islam, that person who is actually coming from the womb of his sister is not even entitled to a share in a man's property, for example. So then when one becomes a Muslim and one dies, one's sister's children don't even qualify to actually inherit that person. In fact, even the sisters may not even qualify, brothers and sisters of the deceased may not even qualify to inherit their brother unless there is no child, unless there is no issue in the marriage. When that man was born, he didn't actually have any child. If that person didn't have any child, then the absence of children means that the sisters and the brothers can inherit. So here it means that if the Islamic legal system or Islamic legal code was actually implemented, an Asante would not get the benefit of inheriting his maternal uncle's property. You see, that is number one. Number two, when Asantes, but for that matter, they are even celebrating their festivals or crowning their chiefs, there are a lot of rituals that are characterized by, sacrifice, traditional sacrifice, which involve, in some cases, even slaughtering an animal, and the blood will be poured either on the feet of the king or the blood of the sacrificial animal will be poured on the ground for the chief to walk on it. These practices are actually classified as occultic as far as Islam is concerned. A Muslim is prohibited from taking part in such rituals, which are mostly mediated by the living creatures of beastly nature known as abosom. I mean, the chief is supposed to be the custodian of the society's tradition. So the local shrine, he is actually the one who, as it were, makes sure or supervises the rituals around it. And so when a chief is being coronated, those rituals that actually take place are seen to be polytheist or polytheistic. And a Muslim is actually prohibited from taking part in it or in them. So that meant that a Muslim simply cannot become a chief in Akan land and remain Muslim. Otherwise, he has to mix Islam with so many other non-Muslim traditional practices. even though elsewhere we may want to argue that Islam itself had accommodated the traditional practices of the Akan people more than any other religion. But that meant that the Muslims will have to re-examine, reorient their cultural values to be able to take care of those values among the Akan. So because of this, the Asante King Osekwami was seen as somebody who was capable of changing the tradition of the Asantes. And for that reason, he was actually destroyed. Even though not many scholars actually reference the fact that he actually converted to Islam, but there is very little doubt that he did, because very reliable scholars have also contended that indeed he converted to Islam. So I'm actually of the opinion that it is because of his inclination to be on the safer side towards the Muslims that led to him being destroyed from the throne or from the stool.
Did Islam disapprove of ancestral worship?
Definitely. Islam, one of the major challenges the Muslims had with the traditions of the Africans, not just Asante or Ghanaians, was the issue of ancestral worship. Islam or Muslims do not actually disrespect their ancestors. I mean, within the Islamic tradition, you may have heard of what we call Sufism. Uh, Sufism has paid so much homage to the great men of the past. I mean, if you go to Baghdad, there is this Muslim cleric, Abdul Qadir Jailani, who is virtually regarded as the saint, the guardian saint of Baghdad by some of the Muslims. The various theological groups that we have, Tijaniya, Naqshbandiya, Sanusiya, and Qadriya, and many other Sufi groups or Muslim brotherhoods are all groups that were actually founded by people who made an impact in the life of others. Muslims respect these people as their very important ancestors. You would care to know that Prophet Muhammad, paid so much homage to his own grandfather, Prophet Ibrahim, that is Abraham. So Muslims don't disrespect their ancestors. However, there is some rule, or there are some rules and regulations governing the interaction between Muslims and their forefathers. Islam actually forbids the practice of regarding for example, the tomb or the grave of an ancestor being resided in by a former ancestor. That to the extent that some may want to go ahead to pacify the spirits of their ancestors. These are all practices Muslims did not take kindly to. So, in simple terms, Muslims were not actually comfortable with what we call ancestral worship, even though they also had some regard for their ancestors. The practice of sacrificing the souls of their ancestors, you know, killing animals, pouring their blood, invoking their spirits, and many others, while others may even go to the extent of deifying some of these ancestors, are all practices that are antagonistic to the Islamic, or call it, are not in tandem with the Islamic rules and regulations. So, in simple terms, Islam did not actually endorse ancestral worship. Relationship with the ancestors wasn't something that was actually forbidden, because Muslims also give names, for example, of people who have departed from them. And Prophet Muhammad, in one of his traditions, is reported to have indicated that Muslims should give names that are representative of humility. So he mentioned names like Ibrahim, and Ibrahim was the name of his one of his ancestors, in fact, his great great grandfather, Ibrahim. So indeed, ancestors are valuable, are considered as valuable, but then the way the traditional Africans actually relate to them is something that is actually in opposition to the Islamic values, and to that extent, we can consider them to be endorsed by the Islamic tradition.
How did the practice of circumcision create a conflict between Muslims and the Asante Empire?
Sorry.
How did the practice of circumcision create a conflict between Muslims and the Asante Empire?
Yes, the typical Asante is a person who believes that admission to the ancestral world is conditional on one entering this ancestral world with the whole body. I mean, in Asante, Asantes were not comfortable with entering into the ancestral world with part of the body taken off. Thus, the typical Asante indigene is expected not to endorse circumcision. In fact, there were instances in which some Asante chiefs who tried to, in the paper that we did, uh, circumcise themselves, not really because they were Muslims. They were not even Muslims. They just circumcised themselves for the purpose, perhaps, of ensuring hygiene. In terms of their keeping themselves clean. But then in Asante, as we indicated, Asante is not supposed to be circumcised. So circumcision came to them as a kind of foreign practice, which they did not actually endorse because they thought that circumcision was capable of mutilating the body, which they are supposed to enter the ancestral world wholly with. And so they thought that when a person was circumcised, that person had been deformed. And so this person may not be welcome into the ancestral world. This bore the logic of them initially opposing the Islamic practice of circumcision. Unfortunately, Muslims also consider circumcision as part of the Abrahamic practice, which has been ingrained not only in Islam. Judaism practices circumcision, Christianity practices circumcision. Although some of these religious traditions may not take this practice so serious, but Muslims take it as part of the, in fact, one of the important practices that they are supposed to actually implement anytime somebody converts to Islam. There is a very interesting story narrated of a person who actually converted to Islam. And then after reciting the kalima, I bear witness that there is no God except God, except Allah, blah, 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 you are a Muslim. Then they told him that, unfortunately, there's a very important practice that is left. We need to circumcise you. We need to cut we need to circumcise you by cutting your prepuce from the grand penis. The man said, I mean, I'm grown. I mean, at my age, if I have to circumcise, the likelihood of me not even getting erection is very high. So please, they said no. Unfortunately, you need to circumcise. I said, but I didn't know this before I became a Muslim. He said, but now you know, so you have to be circumcised. Otherwise, then you can't be a complete Muslim. The man said, all right, then if the circumcision is a condition for me becoming a Muslim, then let me withdraw. Let me convert out. The Muslim scholars told him that once you convert out of Islam, you are a murtad, you are an apostate. We need to cut your head. This man got worried. What kind of religion is this? When you convert, they cut. When you revert, they cut. That's on the joke side. So Muslims still continue to insist on circumcision for those few Asantis who actually converted to Islam. And that served as one of the demotivating factors for the lower numbers of converts that the Muslims made initially in Asante, even probably till now, because the indigenous Asantes entertain the consciousness of keeping themselves. That then implies that Asante Hine is not supposed to actually be circumcised. So circumcision actually created a lot of inconveniences for the Asante indigents. For those who became Muslims who wanted to denounce their culture, they had to give in to circumcision. But many others who thought that on becoming a Muslim, one had to go through circumcision, but one day did not actually want to lose one's cultural identity, still insisted that no, if this is the only way by which I will become a Muslim, then I would prefer to be a non-Muslim. And that worked against the increase in the numbers of people who became numbers of Asantes who actually became Muslims.
Did Asante funerals pose a problem for the growth of Islam?
Definitely it did. Again, another area where the Muslim culture created inconveniences for Asante was funeral. In Islam, Islam is actually opposed to, flamboyant funeral, grandiose funeral in which so much will be wasted not only on money, but particularly resources. I mean, things that will be used to decorate the dead person. Muslims are expected to use a minimum, I mean, a maximum of 3 unsewn pieces of cloth for a woman and 2 pieces of clothes for a man. This is because when a person was actually born, a person didn't come with anything. So it is expected that when this person is going to die, definitely he will die with nothing. In any case, whatever a person will be decorated with, it is termites who are going to consume it. So there is no need, as far as Muslims are concerned, to consume or spend so much on the burial of a person. Every Muslims are not prohibited from being buried with a coffin anyway, but Muslims insist that there is no need for the burial of a person in a coffin, especially when no need actually calls for it. There are some circumstances under which burial of a person, of a Muslim with a coffin, may be endorsed by Islam, especially when one, in some environments, the soil looks, very, very smooth, such that you may not be able to get a very good shape of a grave to give dignity to the dead person who is going to be buried. Muslims also respect their dead bodies very well. So if the sand is such that it crumbles, such that they may not be able to get a sort of very nice shape to give dignity to the person who is going to be buried, so that it will be like we're just virtually pouring sand on the person. Islam prefers that that person is actually buried in a coffin. So it means that the burial of a person with a coffin is not necessarily a major option in Islam. It is only supposed to be an option when the sand crumbles, or particularly when there's a particular rule in a particular country that everybody in that country should be buried with a coffin. If it is a law like that, Muslims don't have any opposition to it. It means they have to obey. The other issue is when maybe the place where the person is being buried, there are a lot of very wild animals, including bear and many other dangerous animals that are capable of digging the ground. If you don't bury the person with the coffin, they may end up digging the ground to exhume the body and desecrating it. So then, under such circumstances, a Muslim could be buried with a coffin. Other than that, Muslims insist that the tradition is that a Muslim should actually be buried without a coffin. But then, having said that, suffice it to say that there are other measures that are put in place to protect the dead body so that nobody can go and desecrate the body. Unfortunately, as far as Asantes are concerned, it is a requirement for an Asante to give the dead body or the dead a befitting, what they call befitting burial. That befitting burial is understood in the context of burying the person with very expensive clothes, very expensive ornaments, very expensive coffin, just to prove that the person was actually a very important person on earth. Anything short of this, an indigenous Asante would think that he has not been given a decent burial. So then you will see an Asante being buried in some cases with very expensive kente cloth, the local kente cloth. Some of these things were considered by the Muslims as waste of resource, waste of money. You understand that? So then an Asante who dies a Muslim, who converts to Islam, at first sight implies that he has lost his identity with respect to him or her getting the opportunity to receive that typical Asante model of burial. So when that happens, it means that then he's not going to be given that proud kind of burial that a typical Asante is supposed to enjoy. And this was a kind of bitter pill forced down the truth of an Asante. This is also another very important reason why Islam didn't make very significant impact on Asante, because an Asante who thought that, man, I need to be, my burial will speak a lot about the kind of life I came to live on earth, especially when the person was actually a rich person or came from a very financially sound family. I mean, this is the time this person will expect that he will be given very expensive burial. I mean, the number of clothes that a person would be buried with today, political suit, very expensive suit, together with gold ornaments, be it in the form of necklaces or rings and many other items, which would in some cases be placed even outside the coffin in the grave before the grave is sealed. All these are things the Muslims consider to be un-Islamic, and therefore they contributed in demotivating the typical Asante indigents becoming Muslims.
So, was Asante's culture too flamboyant for Islam?
Not the entire culture of the Asante. The Muslims actually tolerated the Asante culture, but there were some aspects, particularly what we have talked about, burial. Burial was a very serious problem for the Muslims. In point of fact, probably not all Asantes will be buried the way the rich people will be buried. But as far as Muslims were concerned, Muslims were seen to be, were seen to be believing that all human beings are equal, irrespective of whether you are rich or you are poor. Every human being is equal. So the rich and the poor, as far as Muslims are concerned, it is righteousness that actually differentiates individuals from the other or from others. So when you are righteous, your wealth really doesn't count. It is your righteousness that actually differentiates you from your fellow human beings. But the Asantes, one will say, were very much interested in things that would portray their flamboyance on earth, even when they are departing to the next world, because they believe that one's life does not end here on earth. In point of fact, the Muslims also have the same belief that when a person lives on earth, a person's death or departure from this earth, from the surface of the earth, is not the end. One has another life that one is going to live in the hereafter. However, the Muslims will believe that this kind of life they are going to live in the hereafter is not a life that they are going to call it, send something from this earth to go and live with. In other words, everything that you will need in the hereafter has been provided for you there. So you don't need to send anything from here now. The only thing that you will have to send to the next world to be able to enjoy is the righteousness we are talking about, living a very healthy life. It is the reward that is given to this kind of life that will give you the life, the beautiful life that you are expecting to live in the hereafter. Contrarily, as far as the scientists were concerned, that life could actually, the life in this world could serve as a motivation. They could also prepare for the next life with whatever they have on earth now. This partly explains why, for example, when a chief or a king died, among the Akan or the Asante in particular, they want to even add human beings, slaves, people who are believed to be serving or to be capable of serving Nana, serving the Ohene, serving the chief in the hereafter. This belief is actually portrayed by them sometimes burying a dead body with human heads. In some cases, not even human heads. Human beings are buried together with Nana, with the chief. The belief is that where Nana is going, Nana doesn't have to do everything on his own. The
Repeat
chief
what
or
you
the
just said. Human beings are buried together with what?
oh yes, the
Repeat
king,
that statement. Oh,
when
with
the
the king.
kings,
Okay.
yes, not just everybody, but chiefs in particular, chiefs,
Okay.
queen mothers, and some important personalities within the political administration. When such
So they
people
are buried with
depart,
the king.
yes, particularly the
Okay.
kings. When
Okay.
they die, before their burial, in some cases, I don't know about now because because of Western education and many other factors, things are changing as far as the cultural values of the Akan, or for that matter, Africans generally are concerned. But then in the olden days, the chiefs would be buried with numerous items, sometimes clothes, sometimes things that ordinarily they were known to be using when they were on earth, including some slaves that they believe would be capable, or even in some cases, some of them were even buried with their own wives. They would have to even choose a particular wife that they would like to even go with when they were going to be buried, and this they choose when they are alive.
And to clarify, were some of these important people, like the chiefs, also buried with kings? So when a king died, was a chief also buried with him?
Well, that is something that I'm not familiar with so
Okay,
much.
okay, all right, okay. I just wanted to
But
clarify.
most
So,
of the times,
okay,
it is the slaves.
okay,
It
good.
is
I just
slaves.
wanted to clarify. Okay,
Aha. For a chief, every chief is important in his own town. Asante is a very big state with the chief of Kumasi or the chief of Kumasi becoming the king of Asante. Now, each of the states has its own king. In fact, each of the mini towns have their own chiefs. See, understand that? So all
yes.
these people are the chief administrators, call them chief local administrators, who are actually important in their own local setting. Maybe during festivals, they may come together, around the king for the purpose of helping him to, celebrate the festival. A classic example is the Ojira festival, which is very important among the Asantes. So they come together around the chief, give him all the assistance they need, give him all the assistance he needs to be able to execute that particular plan of celebrating the festival. But for burying them with people, it's normally slaves. The exception is not for all chiefs. There were some chiefs that actually would even choose in some of the dominions in West Africa that when I die, I should be buried with my wife, or some of the wives who even choose to go with Nana, and a whole lot of things. These are all very weird cultural values that in the past some African chiefs have actually observed. But what is certain is that many chiefs are actually buried, particularly the Santini, will be buried definitely with some human heads. For now, we are not sure whether that cultural practice has been discontinued or it is still being continued. But fact remains that in its history, Asante was actually known to be observing this kind of practice. And it's not only Asante, many of the kings throughout West Africa, particularly Ghana, actually patronized this practice of burying kings with a lot of things, including human heads. And in some cases, human beings were actually placed in a grave, and the king's coffin is actually placed on the lap of human beings. And then they are buried together with the king. The belief is that as the king enters the next world, if he needs something, these are the people who are going to serve the king. So it is their belief. So then you then imagine that when such a person is being buried, they will bury him with a very simple clothes or something like it. No, they expect that the kind of life he lived on earth will be the same kind of life he's going to be transformed into. So they actually decorate him with the belief that in some cases, together with a knife, a certain knife which gives him the authority of office, etc., etc. So indeed, Sante cultural values actually created some problems for the Muslims. Not just that. You could also see that even the way of dress was also another very demotivating factor for a Sante conversion. The slow pace of the Sante conversion to Islam. Muslims would insist and still continue to insist that every woman, for example, particularly for men, their private parts are considered to be the navel, the area from the umbilical cord up to the knee. This is the part that is considered to be the private part of a Muslim, even in times of prayer. Once these parts are covered, you may just put on some singlet or something like that and use it to pray. Muslims don't have any problem with that. But as far as women are concerned, the whole body of a woman is considered to be part of her privacy. So except the face, maybe the wrist, the hand up to the wrist, and then maybe the feet. The whole of the body of a woman is considered to be part of her privacy, which means these places are supposed to be covered. Now, contrarily, an Asante, among the Asante, the indigenous Asantes, particularly their women, had a certain style of dress, which is there's a narrow strip of, cloth here, and the whole of the hand is not covered. Then on the chest, there's something here like this, showing sometimes part of the breast. And then what we call skirt and blouse, skirt and blouse, they have the skirt, very short one, and then the blouse sometimes is also very short. If somebody wants to put on the long one, is the slit, and that one should portray the typical shape of an Asante, which are all believed to be cultural. These were all dresses that were not considered to be Muslim, particularly those ones that don't cover the whole of the chest, but covers part of the chest and all that. So Muslims advised women against this. The implication is that once an Asante indigene converted to Islam, that woman would not actually continue to put on that kind of dress. She has to cover the whole of the body, perhaps leaving only the face, together with the Muslim headscarf and all that. Those who wanted to use the headscarf to cover their chest and all that were free to do so. But against the backdrop that these were the typical ways in which the indigenous Asantes were dressing, this kind of imposition, this kind of demand by the Muslims obviously will be a demotivating factor. And that is exactly what actually happened, which made the Asantes think that, no, this religion is not actually for us, despite the fact that they actually were also in to utilize, particularly the Asante kings. Even more, Asantes, just like all other Akans, established, apart from the ancestors that they had very good relationship with, they also established very good relationship with the living creatures of beastly nature known as Abosom, the jinn. In the Bible, they will call it demons. These are creatures that Asantes and their forefathers, their ancestors had established a very good kind of relationship with, so that they still want to, as far as the typical African is concerned. These are creatures that could be harmful to human beings. And from time immemorial, the typical Africans, which the Asantes are not an exception of, think that they should establish very good relationship with these spirits. That could take the form of some people even devoting their life to these creatures. In some cases, they had their shrine as a major shrine of the community. Various households had their own shrine, which they sacrifice. In fact, they slaughter animals and sacrifice to. All these practices were considered to be un-Islamic. The Muslims actually abhorred them. And so the implication is that when a person actually became a Muslim, as an Asante indigene, he had to eschew all these, he had to disconnect himself from all these practices. That meant that a Muslim cannot involve himself in these kind of practices. And these were living creatures. Sometimes these people actually used to also get to know issues relating to the unknown. So most of the times, an Asante who falls sick, or an Akan for that matter who falls sick, will always think that there is a certain broken relationship within the society, or that there's something behind this sickness, especially when he goes to a hospital, he goes to a herbalist, this herbalist proposes a solution. After some time, this kind of thing, it's still persistent. And a typical Asante, and for that matter, an Akan person would think that, no, there's something actually behind this sickness, which will have to be discovered. And then the people they are going to, or the beings they are going to use in this discovery, are the jinn, which the Muslims are also condemning at the same time. So the implication is that once one will have to consult these people or these individuals who are dedicated to the worship of these beings, one ceases to become a Muslim, and that also created a lot of inconveniences for
Yeah,
the
the
Muslim.
Asante were polytheistic.
Sorry.
The Asante
Mm-hmm.
people were they polytheistic?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just like all the other Akan, I mean, the indigenous Akan people, their scientists were polytheistic. They didn't have any specific relation. For example, the golden stool, the entire golden stool, which is supposed to be the blood of Asante, the soul of Asante, on which every Asante chief, I mean, the occupant of the Asante, the occupant of the golden stool is the Asante. The golden stool is known as Sikadwa Kofi, which means the name of that particular chair or that particular stool is Kofi because it was conjured on Friday. You understand that? Every Asante believes that particular golden stool is the soul of Asante, which they have gone to the extreme in protecting it. For example, somewhere in 1901, 1801. Yeah, 1801, 19, no, 1899, 1901. Asante risked the chief or the occupant of the golden stool being taken away in defense of the golden stool. They didn't care. When Nana Perempe was surrounded by these white people, the British Lord in Cape Coast, Frederick Hawson, went to Kumasi to demand the golden stool. The Asantes, fearing a similar fate, almost handed it over to the king. But then Yasantua, this is when Yasantua came to the fore. This courageous queen mother of Ejiso actually came to the fore because of her effort to defend the golden stool. You understand that? Instead of protecting the king, Asante rather tried to protect the stool because that is the stool that is serving as the soul of Asante. That is the life of Asante, which they have gone to the extreme in protecting. You see that? So these are all, you know, indices that come together to prove the fact that Asantes really did not. And every household, I mean, if you enter into the typical residence of the Asantes, every household you enter, what we call Ebusiafi, that is the family house, the extended family house. Before you enter the house, at the entrance of the house, you will see a certain shrine. You see a certain structure, which is actually reserved for the deity in charge of that particular family. Every family home of any extended family has this kind of shrine. These are shrines they actually pacify during their festivals, during their great occasions. So, to some extent, the typical Asante is polytheistic. Of course, today, Christianity and Islam have eaten or wormed their way deeply into their cultural fiber. But even in spite of that, that cultural syncretism is still very much active among the typical Asantes.
All right. And what about diet? Did the diet of the Asante Empire clash with Islam?
Very well. there was a clash between the food practices, if I can put it that way, and the Asantes, I mean the Muslims. You see, the typical Asante indigene is given to farming in those days. I mean, today, as I said, all their farming lands have virtually been encroached upon because of buildings and all that. So farming, Kumasi has virtually become a metropolitan kind of environment. So these are all historical issues. So among the typical Asantes, when somebody cultivated maize, cassava and many other crops, which are delicacies for these animals in the bush, they would normally set traps. And many of the traps that are actually set to protect these crops are set with wire. That is, it is the type of trap that normally strangles animals to death rather than cutting it. If you use a gun will fire a bullet at an animal so that there will be a cut through which the animal will bleed. Muslims have very rigid rules with regards to food culture. When a Muslim gets meat, a Muslim is actually prohibited from eating the meat of certain animals. Apart from pork, there are so many other animals that a typical Muslim is actually discouraged. Some of them are not actually prohibited, but some are typically discouraged for a Muslim to eat. A classic example is grass cutter. Grass cutter is a very delicious kind of animal in the bush. Every indigenous Ghanaian knows that grass cutter has a unique meat, which everybody, even when you go to the restaurant, the price of meat from grass cutter is always different. Unfortunately, Islam discourages Muslims from eating grass cutter. Not just grass cutter. Muslims are encouraged to eat only animals that chew the cud, those animals that ruminate, those animals that chew their food and later ruminate it and chew it again. These are the kind, like the four-legged animals, like a goat, like a sheep, like a cow, like a deer, like an antelope, like those animals whose feet have been separated. Not the crawling type of animals like rodents. They are actually discouraged for Muslims. Unfortunately, these are the animals that when somebody farms or sets trap in the bush, which in the case of the Asante was an exception, was not an exception, sorry. When an Asante sets a trap, more often than not, even among the Fantis and other tribes, these are the kind of games they catch. And these are the games, in spite of their delicious nature, Muslims are prohibited from taking. And so the implication is that, and apart from that, even if they catch a deer, they catch an antelope, they catch a royal antelope and many other games that are available in the bush, Muslims will insist that these animals should be slaughtered. The blood of these animals should be poured. Muslims are discouraged from eating dead animals. Muslims are discouraged from eating animals that had not been slaughtered. Beyond slaughtering, Muslims are also discouraged from taking animals, even if they have been slaughtered, the names of or the name of Allah has not been pronounced. Namely, at the time the slaughtering was taking place, the name of Allah was not actually pronounced. Such animals or the meat of such animals are prohibited for Muslims. Even more, an animal that dies either by strangulation or by forced death, maybe an animal falling from space or being thrown from space or being hit with a very dangerous kind of weapon which doesn't allow it to bleed. So if, for example, you use a club to club an animal in the head and that animal dies without you slaughtering the animal for the blood to ooze out, that the meat of that animal is prohibited for Muslims. Now, these are animals other than the guns of today that you can just go to a bush to shoot. Muslim scholars agree that when you are using the gun, you can fire at the animal, and then at the time you are releasing the bullet, you just mention the name of Allah. When you shoot and you are able to get only one, then that animal which you fired by pronouncing the name of Allah is actually permitted for a meal for a Muslim. But then the traps these Asantes were setting rather strangled their victims to death, which means a Muslim is prohibited from taking those kind of meats. And this is the favorite of the Asantes. It meant that a typical Asante who grows in the village, where people are accustomed to making use of these animals, which are trapped through strangulation or which are killed through strangulation and many other forms of killing, cannot become Muslims. Or alternatively, they have to stop eating those animals. This is also another demotivating factor for Asantes who wanted to actually become Muslim. So then once they became Muslim, they had to actually eschew all those practices. Till today, perhaps if Asantes are Muslims, then most likely they may either forget about some of those rules and regulations and, as it were, break the rules of the religion, because now they are individuals and nobody can monitor what they actually do in their households, or they have to eschew those types of meals, etc., etc. So indeed, the food of the Asante actually also posed some challenge for the Muslims, and that also played out very well in the conversion, the slow pace of the conversion to Islam by the Asante indigents.
All right.
Hmm.
Excellent discussion. Thanks for coming on. And I did read your pieces. I follow your research. And
Good.
I hope that our listeners will also enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Where are you based?
I'm in the Ghana.
Oh, Ghana, not
Yeah,
South Africa. Not South
yeah,
Africa.
West Africa. Yeah,
No, I said not South Africa.
no, West Africa. I'm here in
Okay.
West Africa.
Where do you
Yeah.
teach? Which university?
I'm at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana.
Oh, Cape Coast. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was
Mm,
making an error. Okay.
mm,
Cape Coast. And are you
yeah.
a Santi? Okay,
No,
all
I'm not a
right, all
Santi
right
per
then.
se,
Oh, you're not
but I'm an Akan.
okay. Oh, you're an Akan.
Yeah,
Which one?
I'm a
Which
Fanti.
one? Oh, you're Fanti.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm the Great Empire. All right
yeah.
then. Thanks for
Mm,
coming on, Jibril. Bye.
you're welcome. Thank you.